They thought towing his truck would teach him a lesson, just another tenet, another rule, another fee he'd grumble about and pay like everyone else. But what they didn't realize that morning was simple. They didn't tow a truck, they pulled the thread that unraveled their entire operation. And by the time it was over, that little lesson was going to cost them $500,000. Now the guy at the center of all this, his name wasn't anything fancy. Marcus Reed, 36, diesel mechanic, hands always stained with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed, the kind of guy who didn't say much but noticed everything. He lived in a second-floor unit at a place called Ridgeview Flats, just outside Fort Worth, Texas. Not exactly luxury, but not falling apart either. Middle of the road, same as most of the folks living there. People working double shifts, raising kids, minding their business. Marcus had been there 4 years. Long enough to know who slammed doors, who played music too loud, which neighbor's dog barked at 2 a.m., and more importantly, where he parked his truck. That truck was a lifted black Silverado, older model but clean, the kind of vehicle you don't just drive, you rely on. In the bed, locked under a heavy-duty toolbox, was about $8,000 worth of tools, his livelihood. Torque wrenches, diagnostic gear, specialty stuff most people wouldn't even recognize, but without it, he didn't work. So yeah, he parked close. Always the same spot, right below his window. Not because anyone assigned it to him, not officially, but because for 4 years, nobody said a word. It was understood. You don't mess with a man's tools, and you don't mess with a spot that's clearly claimed. Even the neighbors knew. Old Mrs. Carter in 2A used to joke, "Marcus, if I ever see your truck gone, I'm calling the police before you even notice." He'd just laugh, tip his cap, keep walking. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Alarm went off at 5:30. He rolled out of bed slow, joints stiff, poured himself some cheap coffee, stood by the window for a second just waking up, and something fell off before he even processed it. The space was empty. Now at first, his brain didn't jump to towing. It jumped to theft. Your heart does that little drop, like missing a step in the dark. He leaned closer to the glass, squinting like maybe he just parked somewhere else and forgot. But no, that was his spot. Empty. Clean. He didn't run. Marcus wasn't the running type. He just grabbed his keys, walked downstairs, slower than you'd expect for a man who might have just lost his truck, and stood there staring at the asphalt like it owed him an explanation. That's when he noticed the lines. Fresh paint. Bright white. Perfectly straight. The whole lot had been restriped overnight. And each space, numbered. He let out a breath through his nose, long and quiet. Well, that's new. A guy from 3C, Tyler, was already outside pacing with his phone in hand. "You see this?" he said, waving toward the lot. "They changed everything overnight, man. My car's gone too." "Tow?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Tyler said, frustrated. "Called the office. They said we're all assigned spots now. No notice. Nothing. Just boom." Marcus just nodded once. Didn't say much. But inside, something was shifting. He walked back up to his apartment, grabbed his phone, called the leasing office. Straight to voicemail. Of course. So he did the next logical thing. He got in his backup ride, an old beater sedan that barely started on the first try, and drove 10 miles out to the impound yard they told Tyler about. The place looked exactly how you'd expect. Chain-link fence, mud everywhere, rows of cars sitting like they'd been forgotten by the world. A small office with a sliding glass window and a guy inside who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus stepped up, calm, hands in his pockets. Black Silverado. Lifted. Came in this morning. The guy typed slow, barely looking at him. Then he printed something out, slid it under the glass. $5.25. Cash or card. Marcus glanced down at the paper. Tow fee, processing fee, overnight storage. All stacked up like it was nothing. $525. He repeated, not angry, just making sure he heard it right. "Yep," the guy said, finally looking up with a little smirk. "Or $75 a day if you want to think about it." There was a moment there, quiet. Marcus just standing, staring at the paper, then back at the guy. Most people in that situation, they'd argue, get loud, maybe even cause a scene. Marcus didn't. He smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough to show he wasn't upset, which somehow made it worse. "Nah," he said, sliding the paper back. "I'm good." The guy blinked. "You're not getting your truck?" Marcus shrugged slightly. "Not today." And just like that, he turned and walked out. Now that right there, that was the moment everything changed. Because it wasn't about the truck anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about something not sitting right. Marcus had spent years fixing machines, engines, transmissions, systems, and when something didn't make sense, you didn't ignore it. You took it apart until it did. And this didn't make sense. No notice. Overnight changes. Immediate towing. High fees. It felt less like a mistake and more like someone thought they could get away with something. So instead of paying the $525, Marcus went home, sat down at his kitchen table with that same cup of now-cold coffee, opened his laptop, and started digging. And for the next 48 hours, he didn't stop. Now here's the thing about Marcus. He wasn't some lawyer. He didn't have a background in real estate. Hell, he barely liked paperwork. But he had patience, and more importantly, he had that mechanic's mindset, the kind that doesn't quit until something that feels off finally lines up and makes sense. So he sat there at that small kitchen table, laptop open, one tab turning into 10, 10 turning into 20, county records, property maps, tax filings. Most people would have given up after an hour, maybe two, but Marcus just kept going, quiet, steady, like he was chasing a loose bolt deep inside an engine. The first night didn't give him much, just a lot of confusion. The apartment complex showed up in some documents, but not others. Names didn't match cleanly. Parcels looked split in ways that didn't add up. It was messy, the kind of messy that doesn't happen by accident. By the second day, his eyes were red, his coffee had turned into energy drinks, and his phone had about 10 missed calls from work he ignored. And then, somewhere between a scanned document from 1987 and a tax delinquency notice from 5 years ago, he found it. He leaned back in his chair slowly, just staring at the screen for a second like he needed to make sure it was real. No way, he muttered. The parking lot wasn't theirs. Not legally. Decades earlier, the land had been carved into separate parcels. The buildings, the pool, the office, those belonged to the apartment company. But the parking lot? That was a different parcel entirely, owned under a different LLC. And that LLC had stopped paying property taxes years ago. Marcus clicked deeper. Delinquent since 2018. Penalty notices ignored. Final warning issued. Then the line that made him sit up straight. Scheduled for county tax foreclosure auction. Next month. Minimum bid. $10,200. He just sat there for a long moment, fingers steepled in front of his mouth, thinking, not rushing it, not getting excited too fast. Because if this was true, if this held up, then everything that had happened to him that morning suddenly looked very different. They weren't enforcing rules on their property. They were charging people for something they didn't even own. Marcus let out a low breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. You gotta be kidding me. Now at this point, most people might have taken that information and gone straight to a lawyer, or maybe tried to use it to get their truck back for free, but Marcus didn't move like that. He didn't react fast. He reacted right. He printed everything. Every record, every map, every notice. Spread it out across his table like pieces of a puzzle, double-checking addresses, parcel numbers, legal descriptions, making sure there wasn't some detail he was missing. Because if he was wrong, this whole thing collapsed. But he wasn't wrong. And once he knew that for sure, that's when the idea started forming. Slow at first, then sharper, then clear. He didn't need to fight them. He could outplay them. The auction was in 3 weeks. Marcus checked his bank account that night. It wasn't pretty. Rent, bills, gas, food. There wasn't much left over. Certainly not 10 grand sitting around waiting to be spent on something as crazy as buying a parking lot. But then again, Marcus wasn't looking at it like a parking lot. He was looking at control. So the next few weeks, he worked. And I mean worked. Overtime shifts. Weekend calls. Emergency repairs nobody else wanted to take. Crawling under trucks in 100-degree heat. Coming home smelling like diesel and sweat. Grabbing a quick shower. Then back to that kitchen table, checking numbers again. A couple people noticed. Tyler from 3C knocked on his door one night. Hey man, you ever gonna get your truck back? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, calm as ever. Yeah, he said, just not the way they think. Tyler frowned. What does that even mean? Marcus just smiled a little. You'll see. Even Mrs. Carter asked him in passing. Honey, you need help with anything? This whole situation feels wrong. Marcus shook his head gently. I appreciate it, but I got it. And he meant that. Because by the time auction day rolled around, Marcus had scraped together just over $9,000. Every extra dollar he could find. It wasn't enough to feel comfortable, but it was enough to try. The auction itself wasn't some big dramatic event. No fancy room. No fast-talking auctioneer banging a gavel. It was quiet. County office. A handful of people. Some investors. A couple of locals. One or two guys who looked like they did this for a living. Marcus showed up in a plain shirt, work boots, hands still rough from the week. And he kept to himself. The parcel came up halfway through. Parcel 47B, the clerk said, barely looking up. Minimum bid, $10,200. There was a pause. One guy in the corner raised his hand. 10-2. Another voice followed. 10-5. Marcus didn't move yet. He just watched, listened, getting a feel for it. 11. 11-5. The numbers climbed. Not fast, but steady. Marcus exhaled slowly, then raised his hand. 9-2. The room went quiet for a second. The clerk looked up. Sir, minimum bid is 10-2. Marcus nodded. That's if taxes are fully delinquent with no adjustments, he said calmly, tapping the paperwork in front of him. There's a pending correction on assessed value from last quarter. Lowers the required minimum. The clerk paused, flipped through her own documents, frowned slightly, then nodded. That's correct. Now the room shifted. The guy who'd been bidding 11-5 leaned back, annoyed. You serious right now? Marcus didn't even look at him. Just sat there, steady. The clerk cleared her throat. Revised opening bid accepted at $9,200. Silence. Nobody jumped in. Because here's the thing. Those investors? They weren't emotional. If something got complicated, uncertain, messy, they walked away. Plenty of other clean deals out there. The clerk waited a few seconds longer. Any other bids? Nothing. Going once. Marcus didn't move. Going twice. Still nothing. Sold. Just like that. No celebration. No reaction. Marcus just nodded once, like he'd just finished a regular transaction, signed the paperwork, and walked out. But inside, everything had shifted. Because 30 days from that moment, once the deed cleared and recorded, Marcus Reed wasn't just a tenant anymore. He owned the ground every single one of those cars was parked on. And he hadn't even gotten his truck back yet. Now those 30 days while the paperwork cleared, they didn't feel fast. They dragged. Not because Marcus was nervous, but because everything was in motion and nobody else knew it yet. The complex kept operating like nothing had changed, like they still owned the ground under everyone's tires, still towing cars, still charging people for assigned spots that, on paper, weren't even theirs to assign. Marcus went back to work like normal. Same long shifts, same grease under his nails, and every now and then he'd pass that empty spot under his window and just pause for a second, looking at it, not frustrated anymore, just thinking. Because now it wasn't about getting even. It was about timing. On day 29, he got the call. County clerk. Deed recorded. Official. Marcus didn't say much on the phone. Just a quiet, appreciate it, and hung up. Sat there for a second, keys in his hand, then let out a slow breath. All right, he said to himself, almost like flipping a switch. Let's go. The next morning, he didn't rush. No dramatic entrance, no big scene. He grabbed a stack of printed notices he'd made the night before, simple, bold letters, nothing fancy, and walked out into the parking lot just as the sun was coming up. One by one, he slid those notices under windshield wipers. Every car. Didn't matter if he knew the person or not. Didn't matter if they'd been towed before. Fair was fair. By the time people started heading out for work, the lot looked different. Not physically, but you could feel it. Confusion at first. People standing outside their cars reading the paper, looking around, talking to each other. Tyler was the first to come knocking. Marcus, what is this? He said, holding up the notice. Marcus leaned against his doorframe, calm as ever. Exactly what it says. Tyler read it again out loud, slower this time. This parking lot is now privately owned. Monthly parking, $30. Payable via cash or transfer. Previous permits are no longer valid. He looked up. You serious? Marcus nodded. Yeah. You own this? Yeah. There was a pause. Then Tyler just started laughing. Not mocking, more like disbelief. No way. Man, no way. But it was real. And within a couple hours, the leasing office found out too. Marcus didn't go to them first. He waited. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at his door. Sharp. Not friendly. He opened it to find Denise, The property manager, standing there with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, holding one of his notices like it offended her personally. "Marcus," she said, voice clipped. "You mind explaining what this is?" Marcus glanced at the paper, then back at her. "Looks pretty self-explanatory." Her smile tightened. "You cannot just claim property like this. This is Ridgeview Flats parking." Marcus stepped inside for a second, grabbed a folder, came back out, and handed her a copy of the recorded deed. "Actually," he said calmly, "it's not." She took it, barely looking at it at first. Then her expression shifted. Just a little. Enough to tell she understood exactly what she was seeing. "This isn't over," she said quickly, handing it back. Marcus shrugged slightly. Didn't say it was. And just like that, the game was on. Now here's where things got interesting. Because Marcus didn't try to squeeze people. He could have. Legally, he had control now. He could have charged more than the complex ever did. Instead, he went the other way. $30 a month. That's it. Less than a third of what management had been charging. And people noticed. Fast. Within a day, his phone started buzzing. Messages, calls, knocks on the door. Not complaints, support. Mrs. Carter brought him cookies. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, shaking her head. "Good for you." Tyler signed up immediately. "Man, I don't even care about the price. This is just beautiful." Even people Marcus barely knew started nodding at him differently. Respect. Not loud, not over the top, but real. Management, on the other hand, they panicked. First, they tried calling the police. "Fraud," they said. "Misrepresentation." 2 officers showed up, walked the lot, talked to Denise, then came up to Marcus's door. He handed them the deed. They looked it over, exchanged a glance. Then one of them handed it back with a small shrug. "Looks legit," he said. That was strike 1. Then management tried towing again. Same company. Another resident's car got hooked up, hauled off. But this time, Marcus was ready. He showed up at the impound yard. Same place as before, same muddy ground. But now he wasn't just a guy trying to get his truck back. He walked in with the deed, and a sheriff's deputy beside him. Set the paper down on the counter. "This vehicle," Marcus said, tapping the document lightly, "was removed from my property without authorization." The guy behind the counter recognized him immediately. That little smirk from before, gone. He didn't argue, didn't push back. He just nodded, turned around, and within 4 minutes, the car was released. No fee, nothing. And later that day, the tow company blocked Ridgeview Flats' number. That was strike 2. After that, the tone changed. No more threats. No more attitude. Now it was negotiation. The first offer came quick. $50,000. Marcus didn't even blink. No. A week later, $100,000. He leaned back in a folding chair he'd set up in his old parking spot, arms resting easy. You can do better. By the time they hit 250, the conversations were happening behind closed doors. Lawyers involved. Emails flying. Corporate office stepping in from Dallas. And through all of it, Marcus stayed exactly the same. Calm. Patient. Unmoved. One afternoon, Denise came down herself. No clipboard this time. No attitude. Just tired. "What do you want?" she asked. Marcus looked at her for a second, then down at the asphalt, then back up. "You charged me $525, he said evenly. "To get my truck back." She didn't respond. "So here's what we're gonna do," he continued. $500,000. Or you keep renting land you don't own." There was a long silence. Because she knew. They'd already lost. It just hadn't been finalized yet. 6 months. That's how long it dragged on. 6 months of lawyers, paperwork, local news picking up the story, residents openly siding with Marcus, some even wearing homemade shirts that said Team Reed, like it was a damn sports event. And then one day, it ended. No announcement. No press release. Just a wire transfer. $525,000. Exact. Marcus checked the number twice. Then once more. Then just sat there for a second, quiet. Not celebrating. Not shocked. Just satisfied. He paid off his truck first. Of course. Then he bought his mom a house out in New Braunfels, something she'd talked about for years, but never thought she'd actually get. And as for Ridgeview Flats, he moved out a month later. But not before one last thing. He pulled into that same spot under his old window. Except this time, it wasn't the Silverado. It was a brand new Raptor. Wrapped clean. Sharp. And right above the space, a small metal sign. Property of Marcus Reed. Unauthorized towing will be prosecuted. No threats. No extra words. Just a reminder. Now here's the thing. Depending on who you ask, this story hits different. Some people say Marcus was justified, that the complex got exactly what they deserved for cutting corners and pushing people around. Others say he went too far, that he could have just taken his win earlier and walked away. So I'll leave it to you. Was this justice? Or was it revenge dressed up as fairness? And if you were in his position, would you have done the same thing? Or stopped long before 500,000? Let me know in the comments.